Muito boa tarde. Nós temos a satisfação de começar esse webinar, que terá como aqui nossa apresentadora, a professora Laura Valente, que vai fazer, vai explicitar aqui esse evento, e eu já, desde logo, agradeço o apoio inestimável, muito valioso da Embaixada e do Consulado dos Estados Unidos, que nos trouxeram aqui ilustres palestrantes. Agradeço muito ao Dr. David Cash e Robson Zuttini. Laura, nossa grande pesquisadora e professora do Centro de Estudos sobre Infraestrutura e Soluções Ambientais. Laura, por favor.
Okay, I'm going to start in English. And thank you, Professor Gesner Oliveira, for the introduction. First of all, I'd like to read the disclaimer. The manifestations expressed by members of the Getúlio Vargas Foundation and by guests participating in this event and on broadcast online represent exclusively the opinions of their authors and not necessarily the institutional position of FGV. We also reiterate that everyone present here has agreed to participate in this event spontaneously. And with this, we authorize the use of their image for this transmission that will be available later on in FGV's official channels. So in completing what Professor Gesner said, I am a research fellow at Getúlio Vargas Foundation, and I am very honored to be a moderator in this session. And thank you all for being here. The center places great emphasis on the environment, and it is a pleasure to speak to the audience about the visions of the US and Brazil as an environmental power. So most of the presentation will be in English. If you are watching it through Zoom platform, you can use a simultaneous translation option. If you want to ask questions, you can send them via the Q&A chat. They will be answered at the end of the event. If you're watching on YouTube, you can go to the link here. You can see it on the screen, and you can submit your question in the space allocated. So now I would like to introduce Dr. David Cash from the EPA. He's a regional administrator for the US Environmental Protection Agency in New England since February 2022. Previously, he was a climate consultant as well as a dean of the University of Massachusetts Graduate School of Policy and Global Studies. Previously, Cash worked in Massachusetts government, developing and implementing environmental, climate, clean energy, water, and waste management regulatory programs, renewable energy and grid modernization efforts, and the nation's first CO2 cap and trade program. Mr. Robinson Zuntini has a bachelor's degree in physics from the Pontifical Catholic University. He has an MBA in executive and business administration from Getúlio Vargas Foundation. And he's the South America area manager of Calgon Carbon Corporation. He's experienced in water, wastewater, liquids and air treatment, such as filtration, purification, separation, as well as environmental solutions for pollutants removals. He's a specialist in activated carbon applications and other media with 20 plus years of experience in this area. And well, most of all, you know Professor Gesner Oliveira, but I have the honor of introducing him here for our international audience. He's a professor of economics at Getúlio Vargas Foundation and coordinator of FGV Infrastructure Environmental Solutions Study Center, the CEISA. He has a PhD in economics from the University of California, Berkeley, and a master's from the University of Campinas, and a bachelor's degree from the University of São Paulo. He has been certified as an independent board member and a member of the audit committee by the Brazilian Institute of Corporate Governance. He's also an author, amongst other many publications, of the book Neither Negationism or Apocalypse, Environmental Economics from a Brazilian Perspective, written in co-authorship with Artur Villela. So now I welcome our speakers and have the pleasure of giving the floor to Professor Gesner Oliveira, who will have about 20 minutes to do his presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Laura. In this bilingual approach of this webinar, I will have the presentation in English and speak in Portuguese. And I will share my screen in order to do that. I presume you are seeing the presentation at the moment. Is that okay? Can you all see the presentation?
Not yet.
Not
I
yet?
don't see it.
Okay.
No, I'm sorry.
Let me see, just a minute, you will see it. Perhaps now? Can you see
yes.
the presentation? Perfect.
Yes.
Very good. So as I said, the presentation is in English and I will speak in Portuguese. Let me turn to Portuguese at the moment. Eu vou falar sobre uma perspectiva brasileira da questão ambiental, muito baseado na nossa discussão, na Getúlio Vargas, e também no livro que tive o privilégio de escrever com o meu autor, Artur Villela. Eu vou falar sobre 3 pontos básicos e que estão no título do livro. Neither Negationism, Nem Negacionismo, Nem Apocalipse e a perspectiva brasileira, né? Então, isso que eu vou comentar. Começar com Nem Negacionismo. Essas fotos da Itália, da Alemanha, do Brasil, e a gente poderia coletar fotos de vários outros lugares do planeta, acho que mostram bem como nós temos extremos climáticos cada vez mais frequentes e que nos alertam da gravidade do problema do aquecimento global. Então, o livro admite e chama atenção justamente para a gravidade do problema do aquecimento global. As informações que nós temos sobre, de um lado, o volume de recursos que nós utilizamos do planeta e, de outro lado, a capacidade de regeneração do planeta, nos mostra que nós estamos naquilo que nós apelidamos de cheque especial ambiental. Ou seja, nós estamos usando muito mais recursos naturais do que aqueles que o planeta consegue reproduzir, né? Isso vem ocorrendo nos últimos 50 anos. É realmente uma situação dramática e insustentável. Quando nós olhamos a situação nas várias regiões do planeta, a gente verifica que o chamado Earth Overshoot Day, ou seja, aquele dia a partir do qual nós entramos no nosso cheque especial, ou seja, a partir do qual nós já esgotamos os recursos do planeta e entramos nesse cheque especial, varia de país para país e, em geral, nós temos uma situação muito dramática. No caso brasileiro, em 27 de julho, nós, no ano de 2021, a partir daí nós entramos no cheque especial. Para ter o padrão de vida e o padrão de produção e consumo dos Estados, se todo o planeta quisesse reproduzir o padrão de produção, consumo dos Estados Unidos, nós precisaríamos 5 planetas. né? No caso brasileiro, quase 2 planetas. Então, isso, naturalmente, é uma situação insustentável. Na última COP, o ministro de Relações Exteriores de Tuvalu, um pequeno país sujeito na verdade, ao desaparecimento com a elevação do nível do mar, fez esse discurso dentro d'água para chamar atenção para isso. Se nós olhamos o estudo da Swiss Re, ou do Instituto Swiss Re, publicado no ano passado, chama atenção para o potencial de queda do produto interno bruto em um caso em que houvesse, por exemplo, um aumento de temperatura de 3 graus Celsius até o final do século. Nós poderíamos ter quedas na América do Sul, por exemplo, da ordem de 17%, no mundo da ordem de 18%. Só para lembrar, em 2020, quando nós tivemos uma terrível queda de produto mundial, e ele caiu menos do que 4%, 3,5%. Só para dar uma ideia do impacto muito forte que teria essa situação. Então, nós chamamos atenção no trabalho para o perigo de negar que nós temos um problema muito sério e que esse problema precisa ser endereçado. O Apocalipse, o Nem Apocalipse, significa que o timing da transição, e da transição energética em particular, precisa ser adaptado e trabalhado, porque o tempo da natureza não necessariamente é o tempo da economia e o tempo da política. O tempo da economia requer algum grau de gradualismo. Quer dizer, nós temos mudanças de preços relativos muito acentuadas e que têm impactos distributivos muito acentuados e que precisam ser trabalhados. Nós estamos vivendo, nesse momento, um impacto de preço relativo com a combinação da sequela da pandemia, do impacto da guerra e da transição energética que já vinha ocorrendo. Nós estamos tendo uma mudança de preço relativo e um crescimento do preço relativo da energia muito forte, mais forte, inclusive, do que nós tivemos no século passado, nos anos 70, quando tivemos as 2 crises do petróleo. O tempo da política também requer muito cuidado, porque há um conjunto de interesses e coalizões naturalmente legítimos e não é fácil construir o consenso mundial. Quer dizer, nós construirmos o consenso mundial nos órgãos multilaterais, como a ONU, ou em países, como aqui no caso da França, ou da Europa em geral, não é algo simples e que precisa ser construído com muito diálogo e muita cooperação internacional. Eu queria aqui lembrar a sabedoria das populações originárias da América e do Brasil, em particular, lembrando uma lenda da conquista do fogo da tribo Caingangue, que é uma tribo que ainda existe, cerca de 30 mil membros dessa tribo em território nacional, na grande jornada e extremamente difícil da descoberta do fogo, né, que guarda alguma semelhança com a mitologia clássica que nós conhecemos, e a ideia de Prometeu, que entregou o fogo aos homens e enfrentou a ira dos deuses. Todos esses processos foram processos extremamente difíceis, complexos. Quer dizer, no nosso imaginário humano, a energia foi sempre um processo lento e complexo. Na verdade, desde quase 2 milhões de anos atrás até a atualidade, houve vários passos para que nós chegássemos à era do carvão, à era do petróleo, e agora estamos construindo uma nova era do ponto de vista energético. Mas se nós olharmos para a nossa história enquanto humanidade, essa construção foi sempre uma construção lenta, difícil e sempre procurava redução de custo, de aumento de eficiência. O que há de peculiar na situação atual é que nós temos uma situação na qual a velocidade é imposta pelo timing da natureza. Quer dizer, aquelas fotos que eu mostrei antes, os eventos climáticos extremos, as evidências das séries históricas meteorológicas de aumento da temperatura mostram que o tempo da natureza impõe uma variável exógena ao sistema, que nós precisamos fazer uma transição energética para evitar uma variação de temperatura até o final do século, digamos, inferior a 2 graus Celsius. E não é um processo fácil, é um processo extremamente complexo, especialmente porque ele envolve uma mudança global, uma cooperação, uma coordenação global, o que é difícil e foi sempre historicamente difícil. Nós construímos, no século XX, organismos multilaterais, e que são muito importantes, obviamente, mas que nós sabemos que são imperfeitos, ainda não são completos, e que impõem desafios muito grandes para se promover a transição energética. Isso representa, do ponto de vista da economia, representa uma variação em relação à nossa história. Em outras transições energéticas, nós tivemos um aumento da oferta de energia, seja através do advento seja o advento do fogo, seja mais recentemente a utilização do petróleo, sempre aumentou muito, e isso significou um deslocamento para a direita da oferta agregada. O que nós estamos vendo na transição atual é um deslocamento para a esquerda da oferta agregada e uma elevação de preço. Quer dizer, então, um choque realmente importante do ponto de vista da economia mundial. E um processo de mudança no qual o velho se combina com o novo. Para carros elétricos, nós precisamos do cobre, nós precisamos do cobalto. Para os parques eólicos, nós precisamos do cobre e de outros metais. Nós precisamos do titânio para os aviões, nós precisamos da sílica, do cobre para a energia solar, o lítio para as baterias, são todas fundamentais, mas o segmento da mineração é fundamental, assim como nós temos um brutal déficit habitacional no planeta, para o qual nós temos uma série de materiais, a madeira, por exemplo, pode ser um material muito importante para ser revalorizado, mas certamente precisaremos de muito cimento e, consequentemente, de muita energia para produzir esse cimento. O plástico é fundamental, basta ver no período da pandemia como o plástico foi essencial e ele é fundamental para todos os equipamentos médicos, e assim como os combustíveis fósseis continuam sendo necessários nesse processo de transição. Então, é preciso ter a sabedoria de combinação do velho e do novo para fazer uma transição energética bem-sucedida. Assim como
Professor Gesner, excuse me, I'm sorry to interrupt. You have 2 minutes.
Ok.
Thank you.
Assim como as preferências precisam mudar com gradualismo, né? Então, um mesmo conjunto de proteínas pode ser obtido com insetos, mas não dá para mudar os hábitos alimentares da noite para o dia. Assim como alimentar a população é um grande desafio, assim como combater a fome mesmo, a situação dramática de fome de quase 1 bilhão de pessoas também é um grande desafio. Agora, há movimentos muito interessantes dos aspectos de ESG e do engajamento do setor privado no ESG, que é algo muito bem-vindo e claramente sinalizado pelos fundos de investimento, pelos investidores, bem como por vários autores. Mas é fundamental que haja incentivo econômico para que isso ocorra. Então, isso é uma discussão que nós podemos ter em seguida. Eu gostaria, Laura, de mencionar, por fim, para terminar, a perspectiva brasileira, né? O que é peculiar ao Brasil e que eu gostaria de chamar a atenção dos nossos ilustres colegas norte-americanos aqui presentes. O Brasil tem uma grande vantagem comparativa na sua biodiversidade e na sua matriz elétrica limpa, comparativamente ao resto do mundo, né? A média mundial e a grande maioria dos países maduros. O Brasil também tem grandes desafios na sua economia subterrânea, no desmatamento ilegal, são grandes dificuldades. Agora, o Brasil tem, no século XXI, uma grande chance, uma grande janela de oportunidade para contribuir muito para a questão ambiental, seja pelos seus biomas extremamente vibrantes, né? Os 6 biomas, as quase 50 mil espécies de plantas, as quase 120 mil espécies de animais. Quer dizer, é um país com uma biodiversidade incrível, onde o setor privado brasileiro tem feito projetos extremamente interessantes na energia solar flutuante, no polietileno verde, nas resinas termoplásticas verdes, no redesenho para concessões florestais, prefeituras, governo federal, tem várias iniciativas muito interessantes no Brasil. E o Brasil, quando nós olhamos a dependência de combustíveis fósseis, essas pizzas mostram que a nossa dependência é muito menor do que a média mundial. Nós dependemos apenas em 13% de combustíveis fósseis, com fontes renováveis, em especial energia hidráulica, muito boa, e já com uma participação grande da energia solar e da energia eólica, e podendo aumentar muito mais, especialmente produzindo também energia a partir de biomassa, resíduos sólidos urbanos e várias outras iniciativas. O problema brasileiro é muito diferente do problema mundial, na medida em que, do ponto de vista de geração de energia elétrica, as emissões de gases de efeito estufa têm um peso pequeno na nossa composição. O nosso problema está muito mais no uso da terra e no combate ao desmatamento ilegal. E o nosso produto é muito menos dependente de geração de gases de efeito estufa do que no resto do mundo. O volume de emissão de gases de efeito estufa por unidade de produto industrial é muito menor. Ou seja, nós podemos estar na liderança dessa transição energética, mas precisamos combater a economia subterrânea, né? O Brasil já é uma potência agrícola, agro, e o Brasil pode ser uma potência agroambiental, se nós realmente combatermos o desmatamento, tivermos uma estratégia para valorizar os serviços ecossistêmicos desenvolvermos e estimularmos a bioeconomia e participarmos ao lado do conjunto de nações que estão comprometidas com a neutralidade de carbono, num esforço muito grande para o carbono zero, e dessa forma o Brasil poderá contribuir, seja no combate à fome, seja também no aquecimento global, dois problemas enormes para a humanidade. E isso resume um pouco aquilo que nós desenvolvemos no nosso livro de Nem Negacionismo, Nem Apocalipse, e procuramos mostrar essa peculiaridade da questão ambiental, no caso brasileiro, e aprender muito com os nossos colegas dos Estados Unidos a respeito das peculiaridades, desafios e certamente grandes contribuições e lições do caso dos Estados Unidos. Muitíssimo obrigado pela atenção, muitíssimo obrigado, Laura, pela relativa tolerância de uma invasão no tempo regulamentar. Obrigado.
Thank you very much, Professor Oliveira. Well, about the book, I strongly recommend it. I read it and it was really interesting. And now I give the floor to Dr. David Cash. Please be welcome.
Wonderful, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to join you today for this compelling and such important agenda on the global environmental challenges and perspectives that we face. And it's fantastic to follow Gesner and that wonderful talk. Thank you so much. You set the context for all of these conversations, and I love your focus on timing and the role of economics tools, and of course, the large and important role Brazil plays on the global stage, and especially at these intersecting issues of climate and food security and agricultural development. It's truly an honor to be here and be asked to be a speaker. And I, of course, appreciate that I'm able to speak in English, and the translation efforts are being done as well. And I appreciate that. Thank you, Laura and Gesner, of course, and thank you to the U.S. Consulate General in Sao Paulo and the U.S. Commercial Services in Brazil for all the support for making this event happen. And thank you, of course, to FGV and for your partnership. For those of you who don't know me, I know you were introduced, I was introduced already, but my name is David Cash, and I'm the regional administrator for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and that's in New England. I was appointed by President Biden to oversee the regional office where we implement the environmental laws and policies in the 6 New England states. So those are the 6 New England states in the northeast corner of the United States. Including my home state, which is Massachusetts. And so we cover the 6 states, but also the 10 federally recognized indigenous tribes that are in New England as well. And as Laura noted, I've spent my career in public service. Before coming to the EPA, I was the dean of the McCormick Graduate School of Policy and Global Studies at the University of Massachusetts in Boston. And prior to that, I spent 10 years in state government in Massachusetts, working on climate and clean energy policies. And then before that, I was at the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University, where, among other things, I participated in a research project that examined how and when climate research influenced water management and agricultural policy in the state of Ceará, especially during droughts. So I was very excited to be on an international team that worked on those issues. Now I am particularly delighted to be part of the Environmental Protection Agency, which some of you may know is a history-making agency. Since its creation in 1970, EPA has made great strides in protecting US communities and places from environmental hazards. And when it was created 52 years ago, it was in the wake of an industrial boom in the United States after World War II. Our cities were filling up with smog, our rivers and water resources were running in various colors, and the backdrop of too many people's homes was industrial pollution. And there are images of decades ago that I'll never forget. There was one river in the state of Ohio called the Cuyahoga River, which actually caught on fire it was that filled with industrial pollutants. And I remember smog being so thick over the city where I was born, New York City, where you could barely make out the skyline. And prior to the EPA, we discharged toxic waste without concern for the environmental or public health impact. And I guess we didn't know better, or the economy was so important that we ignored the environment, which of course undermines the economy. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. In those times, landfills filled fast and didn't take proper precautions to keep leachate out of the soil or groundwater. And industry often haphazardly discharged contaminated waste out of the door of their facilities or into the rivers or streams onto the ground. Prior to the Environmental Protection Agency, gasoline that fueled our cars contained lead. And it's hard to think of it now, a known toxin coming out of car and bus exhausts. And because of that, lead can be found now everywhere across the globe, deposited from the air, but it's deposited in the tropics, temperate zones, and even is found in ice cores at the North and South poles. EPA is the agency that put in place environmental regulation to put a stop to this kind of pollution. We were charged with not only cleaning up the environment, but leveling the playing field and ensuring industry is operating in a way that's protective to the human health and the environment, and to the best that we can do, internalizes the costs to industry that the industry itself doesn't bear, but that people bear and communities bear through increased health costs, for example. This year, we celebrate the landmark 50th anniversary of the Clean Water Act, the law responsible for transforming Boston Harbor and countless waterways across the country. 30 years ago, Boston Harbor was one of the most polluted water bodies in the country. And now you can swim in it, you can fish in it, you can boat in it. It's become an economic engine in Boston. And right now, EPA is continuing to make history, taking on the biggest environmental issues of our time, as Gesner noted, climate change and environmental justice, to name a few. I'll talk more about both of those. Biden-Harris administration is focused on making real progress to reduce our carbon footprint, to move those measures that Gesner noted of our annual deficit, or how many worlds we would need to live in the lifestyle of the United States, and to level that playing field nationally and internationally, and to promote equity and green jobs and improve environmental conditions across the United States and the globe. And the only way to make that real progress is through strong partnerships, partnerships within our government structure, such as between local government, state government, and federal government. And our history of success has only been possible because we work so closely with those. We, on the federal level, work so closely with our local and state government entities. And environmental progress on the local level is what it's all about. And EPA helps that progress happen. We like to see progress like fixing combined and sanitary sewer overflows, reducing pollution flowing into rivers, cities and towns replacing lead water pipes and reducing lead exposure, especially to our children, constructing green infrastructure to put water back into the ground rather than letting it run off the streets carrying pollution with it, and renewable energy being constructed on capped landfills or hazardous waste sites. All of these environmental wins contribute to a safer, healthier, more equitable environment, and they go hand in hand with robust economic development. But we can't do these things alone from the federal government. While local environmental progress makes contributions to our overall well-being, we must also focus on the big picture, on the global picture. At EPA, we have a number of international priorities. The environmental justice, climate crisis, air quality, water quality. These are issues that don't respect national boundaries. We must also partner internationally to address these issues. And for example, EPA has been working with Brazil for 30 plus years to improve air quality, solid waste management, and water quality issues. And EPA has the responsibility to work within the international community to ensure a healthy future for all of our global citizens, to support a robust and sustainable economy, creating good jobs, and to share expertise and innovation happening here to advance environmental governance globally. This month, in fact, Administrator Michael Regan, the head of the Environmental Protection Agency, articulated EPA's 5 broad international environmental priorities. 1, advancing the values of environmental justice and equity. 2, combating the climate crisis. 3, addressing transboundary pollution in North America and globally. 4, building environmental infrastructure, a green economy and green jobs. And 5, strengthening environmental governance by deploying EPA expertise and innovation. And let me dive into each one of these 5 in turn. So number 1, advancing the values of environmental justice and equity. So environmental justice is a term that we use in the United States to indicate commitment to meaningful participation and fair treatment of all communities, particularly those that are vulnerable and underserved. That must be the cornerstone of everything we do day in and day out to protect human health and the environment. Administrator Michael Regan recently said, he was on The Daily Show. Some of you might have heard of it. It's a late night comedy show with Trevor Noah. And he was on it, which was very fun for those of us who love both the show and love Michael Regan. And he said, everything that he does is through the lens of environmental justice, whether it's EPA contracting, procurement, regulations, air quality, water quality, land management. It all starts with protecting the least among us. And the data in the United States is irrefutable. Black children in America currently face asthma rates twice as high as white children. More than 1 in 4 Black and Hispanic Americans live within 3 miles of a Superfund site. A Superfund site are those sites that are the most hazardous, filled with the most toxic chemicals. More than 2,600 fossil fuel power plants, or 73% of the whole power plant fleet, are in communities of color or low-income communities. And the most vulnerable communities are burdened by cumulative impacts to human health that come from the combined effects of multiple sources of pollution and non-chemical stressors, such as poverty and housing, poor housing conditions. So we're focusing on righting these past wrongs and stopping or redressing environmental bads, but we'll also be focusing on how to bring environmental goods to the communities that may have been overlooked: open space, recreational opportunities, clean transportation, and green jobs. This is something that's at the core of the work that we do in the United States, but it also applies to EPA's international work as well. And we know the impacts of climate change are not distributed equitably. Vulnerable countries like Tuvalu that was shown in prior slides, those most vulnerable countries, most overburdened countries are those that face the greatest risk of climate change, less able to adapt, less resilient. And unless we approach with greater intentionality, the benefits of moving to the clean energy future will not be shared equitably either, whether it's green jobs or lower energy costs or less volatile energy costs. So these EPAs, as we advance our environmental justice principles in all of our multilateral policy work and bilateral technical assistance, such as advancing equity or environmental justice issues in multilateral forum, like the G7 or Group of 7 or the G20 or the United Nations Environmental Assembly or the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, and incorporating environmental justice concepts into our collaborations, bilateral collaborations, as we do with Brazil. Again, environmental justice is a cornerstone of our work. We take it with us everywhere, and we apply its principles to all of our work, from stopping and cleaning up pollution to tackling paramount challenges like our second priority, climate change. We know that climate change is a challenge, the challenge of our time. We've already seen the impacts begin to unfold: sea level rise, unprecedented storm surge, worsening floods. Again, the photos that we just saw all over the world demonstrating the impacts of these floods and droughts and wildflowers. And these conditions lead to real challenges with water shortages, food insecurity, human displacement. We're working across the US government at the federal, state, and local levels to combat climate change. And it's not a surprise that we follow closely organizations like the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and their most recent report that showed the severity of the issue and highlighting the need to act now. And of course, we know that this crisis is not limited to national borders, it crosses borders. So we must take aggressive steps. In the United States, we've had two efforts, two prongs to our approach. One is addressing emissions reductions. And as soon as President Biden took office, some of his first actions were about climate change. And we've already hit the ground running. We've issued new regulations to cap and phase down hydrofluorocarbons in the United States. We've proposed new rules to reduce methane emissions from the oil and gas industry. We've advanced ambitious federal greenhouse gas emission standards for cars and light trucks. We've reinstated California's authority under the Clean Air Act, which many other states follows. And we're doing similar things with heavy duty trucks. About a month ago, we rolled out a new approach on the power sector. And of course, that's one of the largest in the United States and in every country. And our approach to the power sector is guided by the understanding that fossil fuel power plants are among the largest emitters of many harmful pollutants that jeopardize our health. Multiple, not just carbon dioxide, but particulates and sulfur dioxide and NOx are all big problems. So when we address those, we're addressing multiple issues at the same time. Renewable energy is the fastest growing sector of electricity, and new solar and wind have dominated the new power plant construction queue recently, and particularly in the Northeast, where we have some of the best offshore wind. The offshore wind industry is growing incredibly rapidly. So very exciting on the emissions reductions front. But we're also preparing for climate change, which we know is already happening. So EPA engages both internally and with countries around the globe on advancing policies, exchanging information, providing technical assistance to make us all more resilient with climate change that we know is already happening. And I understand that EPA has been particularly engaged with audience members from Sao Paulo on several issues, including climate adaptation and resistance. Last September, EPA participated in an EPA SETSB U.S. Consulate Sao Paulo event to both celebrate anniversaries, but share information on our approaches to climate adaptations. Issues like assessing and managing climate change vulnerability are big challenges at the local level. They often mean different things in different places. For example, where I live in New England, we're addressing sea level rise and storm surge, as well as an increased extreme precipitation or rain events that cause on-land flooding. And we live on one of the most populated coastlines in the United States, and the infrastructure on the coast is very vulnerable. We're working very closely with our state and local governments to help assess the most severe vulnerabilities, and understanding those vulnerabilities is the key first step. Of course, as I noted before, building in equity and environmental justice to this work is a priority as we move forward. And vulnerabilities can be a range of issues, from drinking water and wastewater treatment plants located on the coast to environmental justice communities with vulnerable infrastructure, facilities, or hazardous waste sites. To evaluate these vulnerabilities, we spend a lot of time using mapping tools, layering data points on top of another to identify areas of concern. And one of these tools is called the Environmental Justice Screen tool, which happy to work with those of you on this call to share some of this information offline. But it models a number of data sets ranging from environmental data to demographic data to socioeconomic data. And it's an excellent screening tool for us to identify what are the communities that are most at risk, not just from climate change, but that cumulative risk that I talked about before. Resilience then happens, the work happens jointly with our state and local partners, as well as nonprofit organizations and even private industry, as again was noted in the previous talk. And we leverage each other's expertise, legal authorities, and financial resources. And that brings me, of course, to our next international priority, which is building environmental infrastructure, the green economy, and green jobs. In the US, EPA has had a leading role in new investments in environmental infrastructure, and we're working to position the US as a global leader on sustainable water infrastructure. Biden-Harris administration has paved the way for an unprecedented investment that Congress just passed. We call the bipartisan, because it was both parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, came together to pass this law, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, a once-in-a-generation investment that will create millions of jobs, modernizing our infrastructure, turning the climate crisis into an opportunity. In that regard, EPA itself will be investing more than $60 billion US in the health, equity, and resilience of US communities. And more than $50 billion of that will go to improve the nation's drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater infrastructure. It's the single largest federal investment in water infrastructure in our nation's history. And that will hugely assist communities so that they can provide clean water to their constituents. And then when it comes to marine debris, I know this is a concern that the Brazilians have as well. Congress has mandated swift action by EPA and other federal agencies on marine plastic pollution through the Save Our Seas 2.0 Act. And because 80% of the world's marine plastic pollution comes from land-based sources of pollution, EPA is focused on preventing plastic pollution from entering oceans and waterways by increasing recyclability, encouraging sustainable alternatives, and improving waste management. And of course, plastics is just one example of transboundary pollution. And that's our fourth big area of focus, addressing transboundary pollution in North America and globally. We know that that pollution, whether it's air, water, plastics, does not respect national borders or state borders. And our work begins in North America, where economic and population growth along our borders have resulted in environmental opportunities and challenges. So for example, we have a US-Canada bilateral program, which helps us co-manage important shared resources like the Great Lakes or shared airsheds, or address transboundary pollution that originates in one country but then flows into the other. We have a similar agreement with the US and Mexico, where we have a border program working on air quality, water quality, and waste management as well. And then there are multiple ways that we work together with Canada and Mexico jointly on the North American Commission for Environmental Cooperation. Globally, EPA is reaching out to countries that are the primary sources of pollution, including long-range transboundary sources of air pollution that can harm the health of our citizens and citizens globally through the Convention on Long-Range Transboundary Air Pollution. And let me close on our last focal point, our number 5 one, which is strengthening environmental governance by deploying EPA expertise and innovation. Environmental protection is all about protecting the people and places we love. It's in some ways pretty simple, and it's one of the reasons why I love the work I do. We do our work in the hopes that, that you don't have to worry when you drink a glass of tap water, or when your child plays football outside, you won't worry about the air they're breathing. When you take your family to the beach, you won't worry about exposing anyone to toxic bacteria in the water. Those are the things that matters to everyday families in everyday lives. And I'm proud to work in an agency that's an international leader with the largest technical and regulatory expertise in the world on environmental and health protection. And we're committed to sharing our expertise, collaborating with partner countries around the world. And we have a lot of work to do, and that we think we can partner with you and countries all over the world. Air pollution, for example, accounts for an estimated 1 in 8 deaths globally per year. And approximately 90% of the world's population live in places where they breathe polluted air. Internationally, EPA supports a variety of air quality management approaches and solutions, including capacity building and tools, technical evaluation, joint studies. On the issue of water, as I've mentioned a number of times, about 785 million people lack even basic drinking water service, most of whom live in communities that are vulnerable and underserved. And EPA has developed a variety of water management approaches and solutions for drinking water and wastewater treatment that can be shared and developed to be specific to those particular areas. As I've noted, EPA has been working with Brazil, in this case, the Brazilian National Water and Sanitation Agency, and the U.S. Geological Survey to provide training and missions to both the U.S. and Brazil as they share information about EPA water quality programs. EPA's actions are based on a strong commitment to the rule of law and sound science. Science is the backbone to our work. We must know how pollution is happening, what the impacts are, and what the best ways to make progress is. Science and engineering tell us these things, and we rely on it day in and day out. Additionally, EPA partners with key countries to develop and support the promotion of good governance, strengthen judicial and legal structures, and develop regulatory systems and support scientific research for effective environmental protection around the world. We have so much opportunity in front of us. As Gesner noted, this is not just a crisis we're dealing with, but huge opportunities. And it's those opportunities to collaborate, exchange ideas, and ignite a transformation to a green economy that I'm devoted to working on, and EPA is as well. And that's part of why I'm so delighted to be here to participate in this conversation. So thank you very much for having me here today, and I look forward to the further conversations. Laura?
Thank you very much, Dr. Cash, for this very interesting presentation. We see lots of opportunities. So now we would like to give the floor to Mr. Robinson Zuntini to give us a bit of what is being done on the ground.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you to everyone. Thank you for joining today in this very interesting seminar. I'm really glad to be joined today and to be invited. I'm honored to be there. And I hope we can address some of those issues talking about Dr. Gesner and Dr. Dave regarding the pollution. I'd like to share my screen to start that. Let me see if everyone can read that. And is that okay? It can see it? Okay, thank you. As Laura said, I'm Robinson Zuntini. I'm responsible for carbon business in most of the countries of South America. And this is a part of the Environmental Solutions division of the Kurarai Japanese group. And I'm hope that I can looking forward to talk with you today about some solutions for air emissions initially, but most of the things that could address more. And let me talk a little bit about carbon and Kurarai. Since the beginning, Calgon is committed to the original goal in helping customers to achieve their expected results, even on the liquid phase or in the vapor phase applications. What we do is doing this being a global company established in several countries with highly qualified professionals. And because you are split in different divisions, we have many divisions focusing in several areas, but most of those areas is to give air and water clean for our society. We have, Calgon has more than 75 years of experience, and Kurarai has almost 100-year experience. And combining those experiences with the Kurarai, Carbon and Environ, our European branch for this division, we become a larger active carbon player in the world. Continues to deliver the high-end products and solutions for everyone. Because of those challenges that Dr. Gesner said and Dr. David also mentioned, we are continuous focus on innovation through our strong R&D division in our capabilities, looking to anticipate those challenges and supply real products to achieve that things, eliminated as potentials pollutions that potentials harmful for the society, even the future needs. We can talk about them later, something related with the energy, but now we are only focused in the main thing that where we are. Because of those experiences that we have, we are present in several areas of our society. I will not expend much time on that, because believe me, there are more than 700 applications with active carbon technology. As Dr. David said, drinking water is a very concern. Wastewater is a concern. But we have also another concern, like medical services, like during the pandemic, our cloth was supported the people inside of those hospitals, clean the people, clean the air against the virus. We also give some water, good drinks, good food, and activities. But our focus today is just for air emissions. And based on that, we are just focused on the depth. We have a more concern, more things. I can tell that there are several areas where we can apply the carbon technology, but we'll focus in that area that it could be more harmful and sensitive for the society, like chemicals, petrochemical plants, refineries, different products, industries, municipal services, landfill. As Dr. Gesner said, this is pollutant, but at the same time, this is important for the entire society. It's making product. This is making things that we need for our regular life. So how can we deal with that? So active carbon is a good technology to apply in this things. For example, we can simplify most of those applications. It's a removal of contaminants from different processes that we can use in product fabrication, waste storage, treatment, clarifiers, vacuum, filter presses, and also the gases generated from the municipal sewage treatment and oil and water separation, for example, in refineries. The activated carbon is delivered in different shapes, different formats. Could be pulverized, like similar to powder, like a baby powder, that you can use in a flue gas to reduce emissions in the flue gas. Also could be a clot, as I mentioned, in the medical applications, bandages and healing for the humanity. And also in this case, in granular or extruded shape. This is a regular way to use activated carbon in the granular shape or extruded shape. This vessel, tank, or filter, there is many names for the same thing. It's filled with activated carbon inside, and the air stream, could be the liquid stream too, pass through and releases, because of the energy inside of the carbon, releases those pollutants from those sources and permits that the clean air or clean stream could be pushed out back into the system or pushed out to the atmosphere without those contaminants. This is a clean technology because of those carbons could be recycled or could be destroyed at very high temperature, and those contaminants inside cannot release for the atmosphere anymore. So this is very easy and a simple technology that prevents and helps for those kind of pollution. Giving a little bit more detail on this, I think because of the nature of these compounds, and they are present in several industries, the VOCs are one of the major concerns when we talk about air emissions. And of course, it's possible to reduce it in, like as I said, production of chemicals, agrochemical, pesticides. It's just reduce, remove. But we also can use the same technology to recover it and reuse it. For example, printing and gas stations, they movement a lot of liquids that generate the vapors. And in the printing industry, for example, they use solvents to liquefy the ink to apply the magazines or the flexible packaging, and these solvents must be evaporated and should be pushed to the atmosphere. But activated carbon could recover these solvents inside their pores, and also with against the stream, like another vapor, will push through back the solvents from this carbon bed and reuse, avoiding to more pollution, costs with energy, and of course, saving costs for the production. We can tell the same for the loading and the loading fuel stations. Instead of to push gasoline or fuel to the atmosphere, the vapor during the truck loading and unloading is captured inside of the carbon, and for the same process with a little vacuum, we push back to the tank. So again, we avoid more pollution, we avoid more system in the air, and save energy. So we can do this because many of things in the activated carbon. One thing that we can highlight this is activated carbon. It's a very simple granule. It's most of this is produced by a natural material, natural resource. It's a trick thing. There are some resources that could pollute the environment, is probably the same resource that we use to produce activated carbon. Dr. Gesner mentioned coal for energy, wood for fire, and biomass. We use these raw materials to produce activated carbon because they have inside of these raw materials are very important and unique characteristics that no one else in the world has. It's the only material that we can talk. It's carbon. So in fact, we use the nature of the carbon to reduce those toxic, hazardous, and undesirable compounds, such as sulfur, hydrogen sulfide, mercury, benzene, mercaptans, it's complicated, organic sulfur, and some other from sewage treatment. And why this happens? Because those materials that we mentioned previously is a very highly carbonaceous material. They have very different sizes, shapes internally of this material. We call cracks, crevices, space, many different things. We can tell that there is more a million thin space in just one pinch of activated carbon. This could be filled with the pollutants. It's not only pollutants, but with things that want to recover too. But in this case, it could be filled with the pollutants and be removed from the desirable streams. And this thing, it's possible because the activated carbon has these different spaces, different cavities that we call porosity. And because of this porosity, the activated carbon technology is able to work with different shapes, different sizes, different energies of many different compounds. And it could be work with those things simultaneously. So it's a really interesting technology because it's one of the most technology that's able to treat different things simultaneously at the same time, at the same place, at the same equipment. So this is one thing that we needed to think regarding the treatment in the future. We can use more this thing for our solution. Now, jumping a little bit to our main company, the Current Group is committed to developing new fields of business using pioneering technology that improves the environment and enhances of the quality of life to the world, which very wide and diversified portfolio and the products and applications. Again, I'm not spending too much time on this because it's many, many applications. Let's go to focus when we needed to understand that. It's a complicated matrix, but this is just to show you that from single products, we make single raw materials, we make different products to achieve different solutions. And as Dr. David said, CO2 emissions, Ferrari is committed in reduction of the CO2 emissions, providing different materials, such as strong and light materials that can be used to reduce weight and the sizing for those parts. For example, in automobile parts, we can replace some metals with those plastics with more resistance and more safety because during the impact it has no cracks and more condition to transport. So you reduce weight for the transportation. So you reduce consumption, you reduce energy, you need less fuel to do the same autonomy. He mentioned that the replacing metal pipes with another thing. Ferrari has particular fibers that produce strong pipes that be used for delivery, even water, but it's used, for example, into the platform for petroleum exploration from the field, from very down deep water through the surface, which ensure that it's not a break because it's more resistance than anyone's in the same situation. So this is something that Ferrari is looking for to continue development to produce product anticipating the challenges that we're facing nowadays. And it's not only for that. Talking about the other field, in electricity, for example, it's able to use some polymers to produce electrical parts with less volume and more resistance. It's still in the field of electricity. I love that. Electricity. We can highlight field development into the Dr. Gesner said. Cars. Cars become more complicated, need a lot of materials, but energy in the cars could be saved with the appropriate technology. Ferrari has technologies using acrylic carbon and another polymers to produce batteries and ultracapacitors that are able to reduce again size, weight, but store more energy so that give it to you more autonomy again, using less energy, less fuel, and more time. So this is one thing that we looking for that it's maybe it's stronger to say, but the outlook, the future with nowadays, because the future nobody knows, but we looking for to anticipate these needs, providing some solution. Back again for the automotive. Again, Dr. Dave about emissions. We have solutions for those canisters that are able to reduce those emissions with lightweight, more effective, with less energy, and also solvent-free components for installation. This is another example. So I can go through this list, and maybe we need more than days to talk about. Again, Ferrari has only to finish the things about the light and the energy savings. Around the world, we have a different trends, but Ferrari has a particular film that can be used as Laura, as architect, we like that in glass constructions to reduce the heat effect on that. So you need to use less air conditioning system, less energy to protect the people inside the building. Again, saving energy. And with almost 100 years of existence, terrarium carbon are accumulated experience in several areas. We need more time to talk about it. And I have only 2 minutes. But as I said before, we are a global company present in several countries with different units of activity, using the local sources to produce the clean environmental solutions. Coal, clean, wood, clean, biomasses to clean. And finally, using my last minute, thank you for all to your patience for these things, but it's really interesting. It's for me especially to talk about the solution for that. As Laura said, I'm a physicist, so it's energy is nature of our life. So we needed to work to save energy as much as possible. So this is one thing that we have to take in care. For the people need a little more information. I know that I talk so fast, but they need more information. Here are our contacts, our desk, and I really sincerely appreciate the invitation today. And thanks again. And I hope we can then join together to talk more solutions for our planet. Thank you, Doctor. Thank the U.S. Embassy for this opportunity. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Zuntini, for this great presentation that shows us the perspective of innovation and how we can actually change with technology. Now, since we don't have from the audience any questions, I would like to invite the panel to make questions to your colleagues. I see here, I'm sorry, there is one question by Artur Ferreira. He asks, he's making a comment rather, should I read it? David, as Professor Gesner stated, Brazil has a challenge in the underground economy. Many companies, especially smaller ones, act outside formal regulations and have no incentive to adopt environmental better practices, with devastating results. At the same time, environmental agencies are sometimes seen as inefficient and a hindrance to development. How does EPA adopt technology and procedures to increase regulatory efficiency as so to grant maximum environmental protection results with as little possible economic cost? And what can an agency as developed as EPA contribute to regulatory agencies in federal and state level in Brazil? And this is a challenging question, especially considering that you probably don't have to deal so much with informality in the US as we do here.
Well, it is a great question, and that the challenges that are put forth in this question are challenges that we deal with, in the United States as well, in terms of enforcement or not following rules. I'm going to answer this question in 2 parts. One is a greater and greater reliance on efficiencies that come from technology. So, we find that easier we make it for the regulated community to comply, the better. So whether this is through new kinds of internet-based or technology where reporting and monitoring can happen, where permitting is online and easy to do, there's a whole suite of solutions like that. Those are kind of tactical. I think a kind of more strategic answer to that question can be seen in the original founding of the Environmental Protection Agency. And one of the words that's often used is environmental federalism. So we're a federal agency and our laws are passed by the United States Congress, but we are seen as co-regulators with the states. So every state has an environmental analogous to an environmental protection agency. They're set up all differently. Some of them have different authorities, et cetera. But essentially, the big pieces of laws that we passed in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, all require partnerships with the states. So depending on the particular rule, the states may take a more prominent role in the regulation, in the monitoring, in the enforcement. And other rules, the federal government plays a greater role. And the reason that I think this is the kind of key answer to the question is that states and cities are more trusted by industry than the federal government is. You know, the smaller and smaller, the question was essentially about small actors, small companies. The more that those companies are connected with their municipalities and their states, and the municipalities and the states are working closely with the federal Environmental Protection Agency, the more likely that there'll be compliance, because they essentially trust the municipality and the state actors better than they trust us, right? So that would be the kind of key question or the key answer in my mind, is figuring out a way to co-regulate between the federal government, state governments, and municipal governments.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cash. There is another question here. I'm going to read it also because I'm assuming that at the YouTube transmission, you don't have access to them. So we have a question by Alvaro Costa. He says, congratulations to Professor Gesner. And what could you say about the behavior of federal government in relation to the lack of environmental management by public organizations? Do you believe that the private participation could face inefficiency of the public power, or just regarding its will to change and financial appetite? Oh, sorry, it had, okay. So, and continuing, congratulations to Dr. David from your experience. How do you think that countries with large numbers of poor people can contribute to become a better environment? Who has to lead the process, government, politicians, or the private sector?
Okay, should I answer?
Yeah.
Please,
okay.
Please.
I thank you, Alvaro, for the question. I emphasize the role of the private sector, and I would also, in line with what Mr. David Cash said before, Brazil is also a federation in subnational governments and subnational agencies, and I think it's crucial to have coordination amongst them. And I would emphasize the fact that many subnational governments in Brazil have, in fact, implemented very good environmental policies, and the private sector has been very active. Of course, that varies a lot. The private sector is not monolithic and homogeneous, but we see many Brazilian companies with very daring targets in terms of decarbonization and in terms of innovation in ESG programs, which are quite robust. So I think that this is a very positive aspect. And during the meeting in Glasgow, I think that became very clear. The federal government in Brazil has not always been so active, and I think that we missed some opportunities. But I hope that this. I see that there has been a change in the speech of the federal government, and I hope that this will prevail. But I think that the private sector has become more important. If we see the size of the corporations, it's impossible to implement public policy without the cooperation of the corporate world. So that regard, I think that the private sector collaboration has been very important. However, it's true that it will never replace public policy. It will never replace the state. But I just emphasize the importance of it because I see very interesting things happening. And I take the opportunity, Mr. Cash, Mr. Zuntini, to invite you to take a look, and of course, perhaps you already know this project of the Novo Rio Pinheiros, the treatment of the basin of the Tietê River in the state of São Paulo. When Mr. Cash mentioned the Boston Harbor and how it was and how it became, that gives me a lot of hope that we'll be able to sail and swim in Pinheiros and Tietê and so on. It's too early to say that. It would be too premature to dive into Pinheiros or Tietê at the moment. But we have seen a lot of progress and improvement. And in fact, on 4th of May, we'll have a site visit to those sites and see how the project is going. And it has a lot to do not only with sailing and swimming, but mostly with helping poor people, providing wastewater treatment and wastewater collection, in providing water and bringing them to a basic public service. So I think it's a very interesting project in terms of not only engineering, but social engineering as well. And I'm very happy that the Embassy of the United States and the Consulate will send some representatives to see that project.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay. May I follow up that and follow up on Professor Gesner's really astute comments, and then follow with the question about the poor population impacts. So
Yes,
I 100% agree that the private sector needs to be at the table. In fact, more than that, the private sector is going to be the engine that helps solve all these problems. We see many of the innovations that Mr. Zuntini described, but the role of government is to provide the certainty in the market and to provide the right regulatory framework so that the negative impacts of industrial development are addressed in a way that the private sector knows how to move forward and can be unleashed to be innovative and creative. I mean, there's no question, for example, when President Biden and Vice President Harris came into office, and very shortly after they came in, they set a goal of 30 gigawatts of offshore wind. And they asked their energy agencies and environment agencies to come out with new regulations to help spur that development. Within months, new projects were coming forward. Within months, new ports were being developed to take on the manufacturing for this industry. Within months, states were lining up to try to get all of these new projects that were coming. We're going to see the biggest growth of this new energy sector than I think we've seen in decades and decades. And it's the private sector that's going to be actually building these things. It's not government, and it's not going to be government. We're setting the guidelines, we're setting the rules, and they'll take advantage of that to be as innovative and creative as the private sector can be. On the issue of how can countries with a large amount of the very poor population contribute environmentally. I mean, I'm just going to speak from experience within the United States, where when communities that historically have not had a seat at the table because of poverty, when those communities start getting a seat at the table and start becoming empowered to put their ideas on the table and express what their concerns are, the more likely it is that wise local, state, and federal environmental policy will be promulgated in such a way that it will provide for, again, not just the protection of the environment, but the sharing of the benefits of job growth and green energy sector growth that can pull these communities out of poverty, and where they can see they have a stake in a clean environment in a better way than they had in the past. So that would be the kind of very high level answer to that question I would have.
Thank you, Dr. Cash. So I would like to invite the speakers to do their final comments. We have a couple of minutes. So Mr. Zuntini, would you like to start, please?
First of all, thank you for the opportunity to be here and to participate with a high-level webinar. And of course, we have a lot of changes to face, but with the real and correct politics, when the environmental that helps the economic situation and the private sector to work together, of course, you can make more conditions for a better environment for everyone. It's not easy, as Dr. Gesner said, it's not easy, but it's not apocalyptic as is. But we need to be critical, in this case, facing what we already know. Calgan is able, and Ferrari is able to use our technology to provide the solutions, but we need more companies working together, following the same direction to save the future for our generations. So this is one thing that is not talk about only companies, we talk about the people. This is one thing that I like for. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zuntini. Dr. Cash, please.
Yeah, I would also like to thank you, Laura, and Professor Gesner for inviting me to this. It has been a great conversation, and there are 2 points that I come away with having listened to the other speakers. Is the critical importance, or the framing this as potential opportunity. Clean, dirty air, dirty water, climate change are crises we have to address, but the solutions to those will offer huge opportunities to the communities most impacted and to the economy in general, because the solutions will spur economic development. And the second big piece is the importance of partnership. And that's, manifest in this conversation that we're having today. But it's also partnerships from the municipal to the state to the federal level, and it's partnerships across countries and across boundaries that will be at the heart of solutions to these problems.
Thank you very much. I think this is a perfect example how people can cooperate from academia, business, and government.
Exactly.
So our final words, Professor Gesner Oliveira, our host.
Oh, yeah, Professor Laura, you are very right. This is a great illustration of how partnership, as Dr. Cash said, works. Private sector, regulator, the state, and academia. And regarding academia, we would like to thank very much the Embassy of the United States, the consulate, and of course our speakers, Mr. David Cash, Robson Zuntini, and say that please think about opportunities for talents who work in the team of Mr. Zuntini or people who work with Mr. Cash, if they would like to see the different projects Brazil is implementing, especially in water treatment, in wastewater treatment and collection, and there are very interesting projects. I think that Brazil is implementing the largest water and sanitation program in the world at the moment. This has to do with the enormous gaps we have in water and sanitation. But fortunately, things are happening, not only in the state of São Paulo, but in Rio de Janeiro, Amapá, Alagoas, and many other states. And the challenges are there. How to deal with wastewater treatment in very remote areas, how to deal with having wastewater treatment and water treatment for indigenous populations in the Amazon, and so many other challenges that I'm sure that you as scientists and engaged in environmental problems, you will certainly be amazed by the complexity of the problems, and at the same time, you will certainly have great contributions to Brazil. So our center is dedicated to environmental solutions, and we count on your contributions. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you then, everybody, once again. And we hope that Dr. Cash will have the opportunity to come down in person to see these projects, right? And
yes, I would love that.
yeah. So these are our final words. Have a great afternoon, and thank you once again to the embassy, to the consulate, and to our speakers, and obviously to the audience. Good afternoon, everybody.
Thank you.